Hello guys, welcome back. Today's video is actually one that I have had quite a number of requests for how to actually go about doing your portfolio. It's quite interesting that you would be surprised to hear that not only F1 have issues with this, you sometimes have SHOs as well. IMG registrars that sometimes actually voice how they don't really understand what they're doing with their mini CACs or DOPs or things like that. So my intention today is to hopefully try and walk through these SLEs, hopefully give some sort of guidance on my understanding of them, what I've learned through the years, what I've fine-tuned, and sort of what I do at the time. My hope is that I'm going to be doing a Zoom recording as well to try and sort of visualize or show you what it looks like with my own portfolio, obviously anonymizing my details so that we can sort of learn from that. So I'm hoping to look at mini CACs, DOPs, and CBDs. Some others like your DCT, developing the clinical teacher. Reflections, I may mean to sort of do a separate video for reflections sometime in the future. Let me know if you'd want that sooner or later, because these are one of these types of things that we need to actually get sort of good at doing. But for now, the mini CACs, the CPDs, the DOPs, plus or minus a learn form, plus or minus the DCT. Okay, so I'm just gonna try and then go on to sharing my screen. Hey guys, so I've just tried to open up my e-portfolio and set that up, sort of walk you through. So like I mentioned, I'm hoping to obviously not share any of my personal details, so I'm just gonna try and do a screenshot and hopefully attach these as I go along. So when you first log on to the Horuse, well, obviously this video is mostly aimed at Horuse e-portfolio, which is what the foundation doctors use. So when you first go on to Horuse, you would sign in and everything, and then you're met by a home screen, which I would hope to attach while editing. Now, on the home screen, you would sort of see the top bar, and then you'd see the home sort of letters written, underlined with a yellow marigold, sort of oranges, tiny line, and then you'd see another subbar with a group of headings. And I'm just going to try and walk us through what you'd hope to expect. Now, starting from the home screen, so let's sort of leave the grey bar alone for now. So from the white space there, we're seeing these four sort of sub-tabs. So you'd see to sign, waiting, draft, follow on form. So if you can already see the bits to sign, there's a 0 in the bracket. Now, if I had something that's sent off to somebody, say a form, and we're going to discuss all of that a bit later, I'd sent off a form to be signed by my consultant, or anybody is being required to send a form, then you would see a number there. If we go on to waiting here, you would you'd see that I have 1 in bracket. That just shows that I've sent something off and it's waiting to be signed. Once that's signed, then that number sort of clears and goes to 0. And I have 8 items, different forms or things in a draft format, so I haven't sent them to anyone. I'm not really sure what follow on forms stands for, but that's a 0. Then going up from there, going up to that grey bar at the top, you have home, portfolio, a downward facing arrow, form, start new, and then help. So if you click on home, obviously that's already where we are. If you click on that portfolio with the downward facing arrow, you have overview, you have contents, curriculum, and download portfolio under the portfolio main menu. Then you have your subsections and your help. Now, I think I've already also made a screenshot of the overview. So for your overview, again, I'm not sharing because I have my personal details here, but I've attached a small screenshot. So when you click on your overview, you have just honestly a summary of your relevant details, your portfolio, your placements, reports that you've put together and mapped, your ARCP, the bar for that, temporary reviewers if you have those, and the declarations that you're meant to sign for the GMC basically. So for the personal details bar, you'd have your name, you'd have your email address, your GMC number, your graduating medical school, and the last time you logged in. If you go on to placements, it would have your placements there alongside your educational clinical supervisor, any other extra bits of information. If you click on reports, it gives you sort of like a summary of your curriculum with all the FPCs that you've actually mapped. Now, I am mentioning those terms, and forgive me, I forget what they actually stand for. I don't remember what SLE stands for, or HLO or FPCs. But I will try and see if I can actually get these and add them on while the in the editing phase. So you'd have pretty much a snapshot of your whole portfolio report. So you'd have your curriculum with the FPCs that you've mapped. You'd also have your summary narratives if you've done these, and this is something that's actually quite new, because our TPD training program director, I think they remember mentioning that this only started, I think, last year. So basically what your summary narrative is you're meant to summarize your progress through your rotation, talk about how you've actually met the competencies that you've mapped these SLEs to, talk about how you've progressed basically during that particular rotation. And you're meant to update this, I think. So I think they're not very sure on what's actually meant to be done. But so what the consensus seems to be is that you sort of update, give a summary of the first rotation, give a summary of the second rotation, and the third rotation, sort of like that, and update it as you go. But yeah, try and ask what is required of you in your own specific deanery or trust, because it seems like there's no sort of focused consensus on the summary narratives at the moment. You'd also have the curriculum progress, so your HLO 1, 2, and 3, and this would be the place where your supervisor provides their opinion on if you've met these or not. Then you have a summary of your SLEs. So you have your mini KEXs, the number that you've done across your rotations, your DOPS, similar, CBDs, DCTs, learn, and leader. Now, a very important thing to note here is that I think in the past there was a particular requirements that you're meant to meet for each, but I think, again, that may have changed to clarify with your specific trust or deanery or foundation school. But my understanding is, I think, especially with HLO1, you're meant to have at least mapped 6 of these. So not 6 each, I think 6 in total. So mini KEXs, DOPS, CPDs, DCTs, learn, leader forms to actually satisfy HLO1. And I think that's for the year, maybe, or for each rotation. Again, a bit shaky on the guidelines there. So you'd also have your end of placement reports, because at the end of the placements, usually you'd have this supervisor meetings with your clinical supervisor, your educational supervisor, and then you have one at the end of the year, and those would be there again. Then you have your reflections, those that have been shared, those that are private. If you're in F1, you'd have a space for your mandatory certificates. That would be your PSA and I think your ALS. Then you'd have your PDP, your personal development plans. You're meant to have one of these in each rotation. Then you'd have your personal learning log. So how it works with personal learning logs is, so you could link your Horuse-portfolio to ELF, so e-learning for health. And if it's linked, when you do a session there, so individual or personal learning, it would automatically be mapped into your personal learning log. Otherwise, you'd have to personally actually map whatever extra learning that you've taken or court teaching that you've attended. And I think you're meant to log a minimum of 60 hours. So you need to actually manually come and log these in. Okay, so I think it's pretty straightforward with the overview, the self-overview page. So that's for your report. So ARCP, again, if you've had once around the corner, I think something would actually be pulled into that tab. Declarations, like I already mentioned, would be the forms you're meant to sign from the GMC, basically. So that is generally for overview. Now, when you go into content, is again pretty much another sort of snapshot of your portfolio. So your rotation placements, form types, just a different view, basically. And then you go into curriculum. Now, curriculum, again, another snapshot, but this focuses more on actually showing you what you have mapped into the different HLOs. So HLO1, here you're meant to map evidence that shows that you're an accountable, capable, and compassionate doctor. If you click on the thing at the top there where it says show me, you'd see guidance, mapped evidence, scriptures, and health education in England. So just play around, have a read, and you'd see what these actually sort of stand for. It would provide you with guidance to map in the scriptures and stuff like that. So whatever you've actually mapped will sort of pull through into your HLO 1, 2, or 3. And whatever you've not mapped will not be pulled through. Yeah, and then at the end of the day, if you want to download a copy of portfolio for applications and things like that, you could do that. Now moving into the subsections, which is sort of going to be the bane of this video. So if I go ahead explaining everything, it will take time. I'm already aware that this is getting a bit long, but I'm trying as much as I can to see that I'm summarizing the main bits. I will try to focus on specifically on the forms. So I'm just sort of going to head there, but just sort of touching through. I already talked about your PDP or personal development plan. So here you're trying to, it's a form as well. So before your educational supervisor meeting, you're meant to sort of map out what you hope to learn from this rotation. You could do it together with your supervisor in that meeting, but sort of map out objectives of what you want to achieve. Say, for example, you're in a medical, you're in a medicine rotation, you're in diabetes. So your aim is to be able to, your objective is to be able to clock in diabetes patients, know how to handle diabetic emergencies, know how to prescribe insulin and titrate as necessary. So that could be your objective, and sort of go through that with your supervisor. Reflection, like I said, different video if required, let me know in the comments. Tab, this is team assessment of behavior. So basically we're expected to send out forms to different members of the MDT. So these include both clinical and non-clinical members. So the ward clerks, the the PAs, the AMPs, things like that. It's very, very crucial for you to actually have a good relationship with everybody in the team. I think it comprises of you need a minimum of 10 feedback forms received, sent across the different teams. I just realized I'm actually leaning quite forward. That's because I'm looking at this form. So hopefully when I'm sharing the screen, I can relax a bit more. Yeah, so the career planning, I think this is an optional form, so just feeling and tailoring your journey through it. In my experience, is not really as monitored as the other forms. The HEELFH, I already talked about it before, the e-learning for health platform. Yeah. Okay, now moving on to the actual forms. Okay, so when you click on forms, it takes you to this page. So you have the create new forms. Now you have a number of forms that you can actually select for. Again, like if you would notice, I've tried to move all my identifiable details away. So you have mandatory forms for each placement. That is your initial meeting with your educational supervisor, induction meeting with your CS or clinical supervisor, or combined one if it's the same person, and then your PDP, like I already talked about, personal development plan. And then these are just the forms that sort of used throughout your placements, which you're going to sort of try and zero into. So you have your SLEs, your mini CACs or your mini clinical evaluation exercise form, your DOPS or your direct observation for procedural skills, your CBD, case-based discussion, a learn form, which ideally can actually cover for any of these, your leader form. I think you could use this when you have a work-based review, and then your DCT. So if you're doing bedside teachings, you're teaching people in conferences, outside work, things like that, I might be able to link that here as well. Yeah, and then at the end of the placement, you need a placement supervision group. This is slightly different from the tab in that your supervisor is the one who generates these forms, and then he selects people to actually give you feedback. Your clinical supervisor end of placement report, and your educational supervisor end of placement report. You have some mandatory forms. If you're an F1, you need your PSA. So if you can see, I already have mine submitted. I don't know if that, I think if I click that, that would go to my PSA result. You'd have a tab, you need one, usually at the end of your first placement, but you could have this in any of your placements. Just something to just chip in for the tab. When you're sending the tab, try and make sure that you're sending these people that you're actually in good terms with. If you've had a particularly chaotic time in the department, or you've had a very, not very friendly sort of situation with some people on the ward, or some kind of tension, you don't want to be sending tabs to those people. I learned that the hard way. Quality improvement program, you will need to do one of these each year, reflections. Then you'd need your Form R. Again, if I delve into all of this video is going to be too long. But Form R basically is a form you need to fill that outlines the number of sick days you've taken, if you're doing extra jobs, things like that. And then sometimes if you want to put in additional forms, like if you had a taster week, for example, you could generate a form for that. For teaching others, I use this one because, like I mentioned, I do teach-ins outside. And I work at IMGs quite often, so I have sort of had like courses I've organized and things like that, and I was able to register those here. Exams, external exams, so there's a form for most things, and you could also make a blank form. This is, to the best of my understanding, no longer relevant because it was, like it is said, it was used for the 2016 curriculum. Okay, now let's go into docs. Now, again, I've removed my identifiable bits of information, but basically what they've written here is that this is a form that provides a structured checklist for giving feedback on the foundation doctor's interaction with the patient when performing a practical procedure. So if you're in surgery and you have assisted in an operation, you could do a docs in that. If you are in a medical ward and you did an LP, a lumbar puncture, you could do a docs in that. If you actually cannulation, technically is a practical procedure, catheterization, those fall under practical procedures. So you could do a DOPS on those. But obviously, as you get older and more mature get further on in training, you expect us to sort of do more technical, I guess, things. But obviously, you're not trying to rack your head. I was privileged to do, I think about, I did 1 or 2 LPs. But it's actually something that seems to actually be quite rare for F1s to do. So if others didn't put in LPs and I put in an LP because I got the chance to do it, nobody's going to scold anybody, kids. So put in relevant practical procedures, but more importantly, flesh them out as they should be. That's one of the aims of this whole video. So you're going to be putting in the date of the DOPS, the title, so relevant titles that you obviously would formulate by yourself. Here you're going to provide a brief anonymous description to allow the docs to be contextualized. So now one thing I think I was told is you want to make sure that you're making this to be as unidentifiable as you can. So if this is a very rather unique case, it probably will get trickier. But obviously trying to be creative in making sure that you're not actually writing things that will identify your patient or identify people involved. So you're going to obviously be using pronouns, probably pseudonymize it into maybe using Mr. X or patient Z or things like that. So try and help you keep that anonymity. Choose what clinical setting it was in, acute, non-acute, community, etc. And then provide more details. Now, what I think probably one of the first DOPs I had done would have just been very basic. So actually it wasn't as basic because I think one of my first DOPs was I did quite a number of assists in surgery. So I actually was able to sort of go in, look at how the procedures were done, try and fine tune, understand them, write them out in my own words, contraindications, indications, things like that. But what you want to be doing here is actually trying to be given a very good feel of what the procedure is and what you did. So provide more details of the clinical setting if required. Obviously, might not be as relevant because you've already picked your clinical setting. Was this a simulated setting, yes or no? As required. Name of the procedure. And then ideally your supervisor or whoever it is you're sending the docs to would be giving their feedback here when you send it to them. Now, just sort of trying to go back to touch on the brief anonymous description. Now, say for example, you're writing docs on an LP. So you want to talk about how you have obviously identified the need or the indication for this procedure. So let's say a patient came in with raised temperature, neck stiffness, photophobia, so you're suspecting meningitis or something that actually requires you to actually do an LP. You've ruled out all the contraindications, you've done your CT scan, you have the clotting profile, everything's in range, and now you're going on to do an LP. So that's our indication and sort of steps we've taken to make sure this is a safe process. Then you are obviously writing something to actually make this thing, procedure more, is individualized the right word to use? I'm not sure, but basically relating it to why you actually did this. So let's say patient, obviously, so brief history, that sounds better. So patient came in with this was suspected, that was done, and a decision was made to do an LP to rule this out. So indication, you have obviously ruled out all contraindications, write all the equipment that you need, and then go on to describe the procedure that you're doing. Talk about how you've obviously identified the patient, made sure the patient was comfortable, created room for chaperone to be present. You obviously make sure that you're being polite and cautious, respectable, as required. So all the basic things that you need to do, and then talk about how procedure was done, and you got the result or did not get the result, and then following steps for the management as required. And then you're sending that off. So here's ideally for your supervisor or whoever you send this off to fill. You could do a reflection in this here, or you could do a separate form, and then you select a trainer, pick the relevant position. Ideally, you'll be clicking yes, because you'd be sending this to somebody who is skilled in providing feedback. Save and review, just sort of to see what it looks like. When you do that, usually you'll be able to come back in and make changes if you've not marked as completed, or save and leave as a draft. So again, obviously you can alter till you're ready and then you send that over. Right, so that's for your DOPS. Now moving on to mini CACs. So mini CACs basically is a mini clinical examination. So here you should have actually examined the patient. So while in your DOPS you're doing clinical procedures, in a mini CACs you're doing an examination. So that could be you're trying to assess the deteriorating patient, for example, or you have clapped someone in A&E on the ward and you've made your own assessment of situations, or you were in med call and you were the first responder there and you started doing CPR or whatever. So basically clinical examination. Now bits of these are pretty similar to what I've already talked about in the DOPS, just so rewind and just go through that again, because it basically applies similarly. So again, your date, your title, provide a brief history, so quite similar to what you do in the DOPS. So give a brief history of the presenting scenario, presenting situation. Then you make sure obviously you're anonymizing your content, what you're actually putting down, selecting your setting. Then I think one thing that's clearly different here is that you actually need to then try and map this to a relevant bit in your, I think these fall under HLO1. So were you doing a clinical assessments? Were you showing clinical prioritization skills? Were you doing holistic planning? Were you doing communication and care? Were you showing communication and care? Was it continuity care? Now, if you click on this icons here, it would show you actually what those mean. So for example, if you're mapping this under holistic planning, you should be showing that you're able to diagnose and formulate a treatment plan with appropriate supervision as relevant. That includes ethical consideration of the physical, psychological, and social needs of this patient. If it was assessment, you're assessing the patient's needs in a variety of clinical settings. So basically, when you're providing that description to contextualize your mini CACs, you want to make sure that you're actually explaining how what you're doing has met that criteria, and then you're mapping it. Okay. Again, you'd be sending that to your whoever is signing this off for you. So same principle basically as the last one. Then this is our CBD. So again, CBD is a case-based discussion. Now, ideally, you're actually discussing something with somebody here. So you would still write out what's happened. So this is a more sort of straightforward one because you're actually having a discussion. So again, your indication of presenting sort of complaint situation, and this is usually sort of directed by the conversation that you're having with that person. Some people might want you to sort of lead and do it how you want. Some other people might sort of guide you and tell you what they expect from you. But again, you should sort of have that structure. So indication, contraindications, risk benefits, advantages, disadvantages, things like that. Now, a CBD, you might tend to be more more wide or far reaching because you're having a discussion with somebody. And in some cases, this might also be a hypothetical sort of topic. It must not be about a particular patient case. It might be about drugs. It might be a case-based discussion. Well, obviously it's a case-based, but you might be extracting something from a case. So one of the CBDs that I had with my supervisor was on antipsychotic titration. So obviously it was based on a couple of patients, but it wasn't one singular case, if that makes sense. So it was antipsychotic titration in patients and sort of like responses. When should you actually think about titrating? What should you make sure you've what criteria should you make sure you've satisfied? Things like that, right? So quite similar to your mini CAC, are going to be mapping a clinical problem category and showing how you've actually met that as well. Now, one thing I have not mentioned is usually when you send a form off, I wouldn't be able to do that because it's an empty page. Once you've put in a nominated trainer, at the end, it would ask you to map the curriculum. Now, all you have to do is click on that button and then map it to. So it would give you a list of options. And then you just be clicking, are you mapping it to, clinical assessments, clinical prioritization, or showing that you're a valuable member of the team. But it would usually be right at the top. So we've talked about the docs, we've talked about the mini CACs, we've talked about the case-based discussions. Now, just to briefly touch on the learn form. So again, my understanding of the learn form is that it could be used to map or relate to one of the others. So it could be based on a case-based discussion, a DCT, mini CACs, adopts. So yeah, it's quite self-explanatory, but I think, especially some of the older supervisors would probably be more familiar with the mini CACs and the docs and the case-based discussions. And if you're doing one of these, you're just sort of choosing them to stand in for one of the other ones. DCT, so if you've done a bedside teaching, so you're putting the title of what you've actually done, record what you've actually taught, again, trying to anonymize the students or patients if you've used patients when you're discussing what setting was it in. Was it virtual? Was it a face-to-face teaching? Was it simulated? Who were you actually teaching? Again, you would send this off to your trainer. They would then fill in their feedback, and that's basically how that. Okay, so I really don't know how long this has gone on for, but yeah, that is basically foundations or what to do in terms of your Horuse-portfolio and actually trying to fill those in. Now, quick tip, I put this in the tips and tricks for the foundation year one or new, so starting in the NHS video. So if you haven't watched that, please go and watch that. You should not wait till last minute to try and start filling in forms or sending them to people, or mapping the evidence. It might seem quite basic, and to be honest, you will I know I did, keep sort of exchanging evidence for more relevant or stronger ones as you go on, but you don't want to save that to the last minute, so start doing them now. And obviously, realistically speaking, you might not be able to do that because of caseloads, or you're just tired, or you're planning for exams or other things, or life is happening, but try and make sure that you're very intentional about doing that. If you try and aim for doing at least 2 of each, and I feel like that's a very low bar, but if you try and aim to do 2 mini CACs, 2 DOPs, 2 CBDs in each rotation, that's quite doable. So you end up with 6 in each, sort of 6 at the end of the year. But I would personally aim for more. If you can, 2 in 2 months. 2 in 2 months, so 1 a month. Yeah, I think that's quite good. So if you aim for 1 a month, I think that's something
achievable, so that at the end of your second rotation, you should be, on average, whatever the maths is, it's not, you know, mathsing very well in my head right now, but if you can, at the end of your second rotation, boast of having at least 4 CBDs, 2 DOPs, and maybe 4 mini kexes, you are in a very good place in most cases. And then you sort of touch things up and finish your mapping as you go along. But yeah, that is the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't watched the other videos, they might be actually quite relevant. So the tips and tricks for new doctors in the NHS, very, very important one. Go back to if you haven't. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you'd add to this. How do you do your SLEs? How do you fill in your forms? Is there anything else you'd like to know, like anything you want me to make a video on? Let me know as well. And until next time, have a lovely day, guys.